Miss Marple's stranded boat. The lake drowned more than hope, Chapter 1. The fog's first whisper. The train rattled to a stop at Lake Haven Station, its whistle swallowed by the thick fog that clung to the platform like a shroud. Miss Jane Marple, her hat slightly askew from the journey, stepped onto the damp planks, clutching her trusty umbrella. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and something sharper, perhaps the tang of the nearby lake. She had come at the insistence of her old friend, Mrs. Clara Wentworth, whose letter had been brief but urgent. Come to Lake Haven, Jane. The lake has taken more than it should. The station was deserted, save for a lone porter who tipped his cap and vanished into the mist. Miss Marple adjusted her gloves and peered into the grey veil. Lake Haven was a small village, nestled in a valley where Lake Despair dominated the landscape. She had read about it in the guidebooks. A picturesque spot, though the name of the lake struck her as foreboding. Clara's letter had hinted at trouble, and Miss Marple's keen mind was already turning over possibilities. A horse-drawn cart, arranged by Clara, awaited her. The driver, a wiry man with a face like weathered bark, introduced himself as Tom Grimsby. "Mind the fog, ma'am," he said, his voice low. "It's thick today, and the lake's in a mood." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, settling into the cart as it creaked toward the village. The journey was silent, save for the clop of hooves and the occasional cry of a distant bird. Through the fog, Miss Marple glimpsed the lake's edge, its water still almost unnaturally so, reflecting the grey sky like a mirror. She noticed Tom's hands tighten on the reins as they passed a weathered signpost. Lake Despair, beware the depths. As the cart rounded a bend, a shape emerged from the mist. A small boat stranded on the shore, its hull tilted at an awkward angle. Miss Marple leaned forward. "What's that, Mr. Grimsby?" she asked, her tone light but probing. Tom's jaw tightened. That'd be the boat they found last month. Empty it was, no oars, no sign of the man who took it out. His eyes darted to the lake, then away. "Folks say it's cursed, that boat. Lake's got a way of keeping things." Miss Marple's lips. "Cursed? Surely a practical explanation exists." Tom shrugged, his expression guarded. "Maybe, but you'll hear talk in the village. Things go missing on that lake. Boats, people, always have." The cart rolled into Lake Haven, a cluster of stone cottages huddled beneath the fog. The village square was quiet, though Miss Marple noted a few figures hurrying past, their heads bowed. At the inn, Clara Wentworth awaited, her face pale but composed. She embraced Miss Marple warmly, though her hands trembled slightly. "Jane, thank you for coming," Clara said, leading her inside. The inn's parlour was cosy, with a fire crackling, but the air held a chill. "I wouldn't have troubled you, but something's wrong here. That boat, it stirred up old stories, old fears." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her sharp eyes taking in Clara's drawn expression. "Tell me everything, Clara. From the beginning?" As Clara began to speak, recounting whispers of vanishings and the village's unease, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the window. The fog pressed against the glass, and beyond it she sensed the lake, silent, waiting, hiding its secrets. She had solved many mysteries in her time, but something told her Lake Despair would test even her formidable wits. Chapter 2. The Boat That Never Returned. The morning after her arrival, Miss Marple sat in the inn's dining room, a cup of tea steaming before her. The fog had thinned slightly, revealing Lake Haven's sombre charm. Cottages with ivy-clad walls, a church spire piercing the mist, and the ever-present lake, its surface glassy under the weak sunlight. Clara Wentworth had insisted on accompanying her to the village hall, where a small gathering of locals had agreed to share what they knew about the stranded boat. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly in her lap, a habit that often lulled others into underestimating her sharp mind. The village hall was a modest building, its wooden beams darkened by age. A dozen villagers sat in a semicircle, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. At the centre stood Mr. Harrow, the innkeeper and unofficial village spokesman, his broad shoulders hunched as if carrying a weight. "We don't often have visitors asking about our troubles, Miss Marple," he began, his voice gruff. "But since Mrs. Wentworth vouches for you, we'll tell you what we know." Miss Marple smiled gently, her eyes scanning the room. "I'm grateful for your time. Please tell me about this boat, the one found last month." A murmur rippled through the group. An elderly woman, her shawl pulled tight, spoke first. It was Jem Corbin's boat, a sturdy little rowboat he used for fishing. He took it out one evening, same as always. Next morning, it was found on the north shore, half on the rocks, empty as a ghost. "No sign of Jem?" Miss Marple asked, her tone mild. "None," said Mr. Harrow. "Not a trace. No body, no belongings. Just the boat, sitting there like it had been left on purpose." Another villager, a young man with nervous hands, piped up. "It wasn't right, that boat. The oars were gone, and there were marks on it. Scratches, deep ones, like someone carved 'em with a knife." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Carved marks? Could you describe them?" The young man hesitated, glancing at Mr. Harrow, who nodded. "They weren't words, not proper ones, more like symbols. A circle with lines through it, and something like a crooked star. Nobody could make sense of 'em." The room fell silent, the weight of the words settling over them. Miss Marple's mind turned, filing away the details. Symbols suggested intent, perhaps a message or a warning. "And Jem Corbin," she said. "What sort of man was he?" A woman in a faded dress spoke, her voice soft but bitter. "Jem was a loner, kept to himself, always fishing, always on that lake. Some said he knew too much about it, things he shouldn't." "Things?" Miss Marple prompted, her eyes keen. The woman faltered, then shook her head. "Just talk. Jem was odd. Said the lake had secrets, old ones. Nobody paid him much mind, till he was gone." As the villagers shared more, Miss Marple noted their reluctance, the way their eyes darted to the windows facing the lake. They spoke of other incidents, boats lost over the years, fishermen who vanished, whispers of a curse. Yet none could explain the stranded boat's eerie condition or Jem's fate. Mr. Harrow ended the meeting with a warning. "Best not to poke too deep, Miss Marple. The lake don't like it." Back at the inn, Clara poured fresh tea, her hands steadier now. "What do you make of it, Jane? All this talk of curses and symbols." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression thoughtful. "Curses are often stories we tell to cover truths we'd rather not face. That boat, those marks, they suggest something deliberate. Jem Corbin may have stumbled onto something or someone who wanted him silenced." Clara shivered. "You think it was murder?" "I think," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm, "that Lake Despair is hiding more than hope, and I intend to find out what." As she resumed her knitting, Miss Marple's mind was already at work. piecing together the fragments of the villagers' tales. The boat that never returned was no mere accident. It was a clue, and she would follow it, wherever it led. Chapter 3. Shadows on the Shore. The afternoon sun struggled through the thinning fog, casting a pale glow over Lake Despair. Miss Marple, dressed in her sensible tweed coat and sturdy shoes, set out to explore the lake's edge. Clara had offered to join her, but Miss Marple preferred to go alone. Her observations were sharpest without distraction, and the villagers' guarded tales had stirred her curiosity. Armed with her umbrella and a small notebook, she followed a narrow path that wound from the village toward the north shore, where Jem Corbin's boat had been found. The air was damp, carrying the faint metallic scent of the lake. Reeds rustled along the water's edge, their tips swaying as if whispering secrets. Miss Marple walked slowly, her eyes scanning the ground for anything out of place. The villagers' stories of the stranded boat, its missing oars, the strange symbols carved into its hull, lingered in her mind. She suspected the shore held answers, if only she could find them. The path veered closer to the lake, and Miss Marple paused to study the rocky bank. The water lapped gently, deceptively calm. She recalled the young villager's words. Like someone carved 'em with a knife. Symbols suggested purpose, perhaps ritual or code. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint gleam among the rocks, a sliver of metal half buried in the mud. Kneeling carefully, she brushed away the dirt, revealing a rusted fishhook. Common enough, yet its placement, so close to the boat's resting place, felt deliberate. She tucked it into her pocket, making a mental note to inquire about Jem Corbin's fishing habits. Further along, the shore grew wilder, the path fading into a tangle of brambles and willows. Miss Marple pressed on, her umbrella parting the undergrowth. The lake curved here, forming a small, sheltered cove she hadn't noticed from the village. The water was still, bordered by dense reeds that hid the cove from casual view. It was a perfect hiding spot, she thought, for someone or something wishing to remain unseen. As she stepped into the cove, her foot caught on something soft. Bending down, she found a scrap of cloth, torn and snagged on a thorn. It was coarse, dark blue, with a faint stain that might have been mud or blood. Miss Marple held it to the light, noting a single embroidered initial, L. Her lips pursed. A clue, perhaps, but whose? She slipped the cloth into her notebook, her mind already turning over possibilities. Was it Jem's or someone else's, left in haste? A sudden rustle in the reeds made her freeze. Her eyes darted to the far side of the cove, where the shadows seemed to shift. There, a figure, cloaked in the mist, stood motionless among the willows. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her voice remained steady. "Good afternoon," she called, her tone polite but firm. "Might I have a word?" The figure hesitated, then vanished into the undergrowth, leaving only the sway of branches. Miss Marple did not pursue. She was no sprinter, and the cove's terrain was treacherous. Instead, she memorized the spot, noting the angle of the willows and the path the figure had taken. Someone was watching, and their interest in her presence was no coincidence. As she retraced her steps to the village, the lake's silence felt heavier, its calm a mask for secrets yet to be uncovered. The cloth, the fishhook, the shadowy figure, they were pieces of a puzzle, and Miss Marple was determined to fit them together. Back at the inn, she would ask Clara about anyone with the initial L, and perhaps revisit the villagers' tales. The lake had drowned more than hope, she was certain, and the shore's shadows held the key to its truth. Chapter 4. The Widow's Silent Grief. The following morning Miss Marple set out for the Harrow cottage, a small, ivy-covered dwelling perched on a rise overlooking Lake Despair. Clara had arranged the visit, warning that Mrs. Eliza Harrow was a private woman, rarely seen in the village since her husband Nathaniel vanished on the lake 8 years prior. Miss Marple, her notebook tucked in her handbag, alongside the torn cloth and rusted fishhook, was eager to hear the widow's story. The villagers' tales of curses and the stranded boat pointed to a pattern, and Mrs. Harrow, she sensed, held a piece of the puzzle. The path to the cottage was steep, lined with wildflowers that seemed out of place against the lake's brooding presence. Miss Marple knocked softly on the weathered door, her umbrella hooked over her arm. After a long pause, the door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Harrow, a tall, gaunt woman with grey hair, pinned tightly, and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the lake itself. Miss Marple. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Mrs. Wentworth. Said you'd come. Enter, but mind you don't stay long. I've little patience for visitors. The parlour was dim, its curtains drawn against the morning light. A fire smouldered in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on shelves lined with books and a single framed photograph of a stern-looking man. Nathaniel, Miss Marple presumed. She settled into a chair, her demeanour gentle but observant. Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Harrow. I'm here about the lake and the boat found last month. I understand your husband met a similar fate. Mrs. Harrow's hands, folded in her lap, tightened. Nathaniel took his boat out one night, fishing, he said. Never came back. They found his boat like they found Jem Corbin's, empty on the shore. No oars, no trace. Her voice cracked, but her gaze was steady. The lake's hungry, Miss Marple. It takes what it wants. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. Hungry? An interesting choice of words. Do you believe the lake itself is to blame? The widow's lips thinned. I believe there's things in this world we don't understand. Nathaniel knew the lake better than most. He wasn't careless. Something or someone made sure he didn't come home. Miss Marple noted the shift in her tone, the hint of suspicion. Did Nathaniel ever mention anything unusual? Strange markings, perhaps, or people he met by the lake? Mrs. Harrow hesitated, her eyes flicking to a small table in the corner. There, half hidden under a lace cloth, sat a leather-bound diary, its cover worn and secured with a small brass lock. He kept his thoughts private, she said finally. Wrote in that diary, but I've not opened it. He said it was for his own heart, not mine. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the diary. A locked book often held truths too dangerous to speak aloud. Might I see it? Sometimes even small details can shed light. The widow's face hardened. It's private, and cursed maybe, like everything the lake touches. You'd do well to leave it be. She rose abruptly, signalling the visit's end. Mind yourself, Miss Marple. The lake's hunger ain't sated yet. As Miss Marple stepped outside, the widow's words echoed in her mind. She paused on the path, glancing back at the cottage. The diary intrigued her, its lock a challenge rather than a barrier. She also recalled the cloth from the cove, embroidered with an L. Could it be linked to Eliza Harrow? Or perhaps another name, Lillian Lawrence? The initial was a thread, and she would tug it gently. The lake stretched before her, its surface a mirror for the gathering clouds. Mrs. Harrow's Grief was real, but her silence hid something more. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her resolve firm. The widow's warnings only sharpened her curiosity, and the locked diary was a clue she would not ignore. Chapter 5. Echoes in the Mist. The village of Lake Haven was cloaked in darkness. The moon, a faint crescent struggling through the ever-present mist that rolled off Lake Despair. Miss Marple, unable to sleep, had slipped out of the inn, her shawl wrapped tightly against the chill. Insomnia was no stranger to her, and she often found clarity in the quiet hours when the world seemed to hold its breath. Tonight, her mind buzzed with the threads of the mystery. The stranded boat, the symbols carved into its hull, the torn cloth with the initial L, and Mrs. Harrow's locked diary. The lake, she was certain, was the key, and a walk along its shore might coax its secrets into the open. She moved carefully down the path to the lake, her sturdy shoes crunching on the gravel. The village was silent, its cottages shuttered, though a single light flickered in the distance. Perhaps the church, or a sleepless soul like herself. The air was heavy, scented with damp earth and the faint brackish tang of the water. As she reached the shore, the lake stretched before her, its surface a glassy void that seemed to swallow the moonlight. Miss Marple paused, her umbrella tapping the ground, and listened. The night was still, yet there was a tension in the air, as if the lake were waiting. She followed the shoreline toward the north, where Jem Corbin's boat had been found. The rocks were slick underfoot, and she moved with the cautious grace of experience, her eyes scanning the reeds for anything amiss. The fishhook from the cove, now tucked in her handbag, nagged at her thoughts. Was it Jem's, or a relic of another's presence? And the cloth, could L belong to Mrs. Harrow, or was it a red herring? Her musings were cut short by a sound, faint but unmistakable. A low, mournful wail drifting across the water. Miss Marple froze, her breath catching. The sound came again, rising and falling like a distant cry, or perhaps a whisper carried by the mist. It was not the call of a bird, nor the creak of a boat. It was human, or nearly so, and it sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but of recognition. She had heard tales of such sounds in other villages, often tied to tragedy or guilt. Stepping closer to the water's edge, she strained to pinpoint its source, but the mist distorted everything, wrapping the lake in a veil of secrets. "Curious," she murmured, her voice steady despite the eerie atmosphere. She made a mental note of the sound's cadence, irregular, almost pleading. It faded as quickly as it had come, leaving only the soft lap of the lake against the rocks. Miss Marple stood for a moment, her sharp mind turning. The villagers had spoken of a curse, but this felt more like a message, a plea from the past reaching into the present. Determined to learn more, she returned to the inn just before dawn, her shawl damp with mist. Clara was already awake, stirring, a pot of porridge in the kitchen. Her eyes widened at Miss Marple's appearance. "Jane, out so early? You'll catch your death in that fog." Miss Marple smiled, warming her hands by the stove. "I needed a walk to clear my thoughts. Clara, have you ever heard strange sounds from the lake at night? Cries, perhaps, or whispers?" Clara's spoon paused, her face paling. "You heard them, didn't you?" She set the spoon down and leaned closer, her voice low. "The villagers call them the echoes, souls of those the lake took, crying for justice. It's an old legend tied to the drownings over the years. They say the lake keeps the dead restless until their wrongs are righted. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with interest. "And do these echoes connect to Jem Corbin's boat, or others? Like it?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Some say Jem heard them too, before he vanished. He'd sit by the lake at night, listening, like he was waiting for something. The boat they found, those symbols on it, folks think they're tied to the legend marks of the drowned trying to speak." Miss Marple sipped the tea Clara offered, her mind racing. Symbols as messages from the dead were fanciful, but they could be a cover for something more tangible. A code, perhaps, or a signal. The echoes, too, might have a rational explanation. Acoustics, or someone exploiting the legend to keep nosy villagers at bay. She thought of Mrs. Harrow's warning about the lake's hunger and the locked diary. Could Nathaniel Harrow's writings mention these echoes, or the symbols? "Clara," she said, her tone casual, "does the name Lillian or Lawrence mean anything here? Or anyone with an L initial, perhaps tied to the lake?" Clara frowned, thinking, "There's no Lillian I know of. Lawrence, maybe old man Lawrence Tate, a fisherman who died years ago. He was a friend of Nathaniel Harrow's, I think. Why do you ask?" Miss Marple patted her handbag where the cloth rested. "Just a hunch. I'll need to speak to more villagers about this legend. It's curious how it ties to the boat." As Clara returned to her porridge, Miss Marple's thoughts churned. The echoes in the mist were a new thread, weaving the stranded boat, the symbols, and the lake's grim history together. The legend of drowned souls seeking justice was compelling, but she suspected the truth was earthier. Greed, betrayal, or revenge, hidden beneath the lake's glassy surface. She would follow the echoes, just as she followed the cloth and the fishhook, until the lake's secrets could no longer hide. Chapter 6. The Fisherman's Confession. The sun hung low over Lake Haven, painting the lake's surface with streaks of gold that did little to dispel its ominous air. Miss Marple, her handbag heavier with the weight of accumulating clues, the rusted fishhook, the cloth with the initial L, and her notes on the echoes in the mist, made her way to the village dock. Her conversation with Clara about the legend of drowned souls had sharpened her focus on the lake's living inhabitants, particularly Tom Grimsby, the wiry fisherman who had driven her from the station. His guarded words about the stranded boat and the lake's mood lingered in her mind, and she sensed he knew more than he had let on. The dock was a weathered affair, its planks creaking underfoot as gulls wheeled overhead. Tom was there, mending a net with hands that trembled slightly. His weathered face tightened at Miss Marple's approach, but he nodded, setting the net aside. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice gruff. "Didn't expect to see you here. Lake's no place for a lady like yourself." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes gentle but piercing. "Nonsense, Mr. Grimsby. A lake is just water, and water holds no secrets from those who ask the right questions. I'd like to ask you a few about Jem Corbin and that boat of his." Tom's hands stilled, and he glanced toward the lake, as if expecting it to overhear. "I told you what I know. Boat was found empty, oars gone. Jem's gone too. Ain't much more to say." Miss Marple settled onto a nearby crate, her umbrella resting across her knees. "I think there is, Mr. Grimsby. You mentioned the lake keeping things. A curious phrase, and I've heard whispers of strange sounds at night. Symbols on the boat, and now this talk of drowned souls. You knew Jem, didn't you? Perhaps you know what he was doing out there." Tom's jaw clenched, and for a moment she thought he might bolt. But then His shoulders sagged, and he leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "All right, ma'am, but you didn't hear this from me. Jem wasn't just fishing. He was moving things. Goods, you might say. Across the lake, at night." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly, though her expression remained calm. "Smuggling, you mean?" Tom flinched at the word, his eyes darting to the shadows of the dock. "Call it what you like. Small stuff, liquor, tobacco, sometimes coin. There's folks on the other side of the lake, beyond the village's reach, who pay well. Jem was good at it, quiet, knew the lake's currents. But he got greedy, started asking questions about bigger hauls, things he shouldn't have touched." Miss Marple's mind raced, connecting the smuggling to the symbols on the boat, perhaps markers for drop-offs or signals. And these bigger hauls? What were they? Tom shook his head, his face ashen. "I don't know, I swear." Jem wouldn't say, but he was scared last time I saw him. Kept talking about the watchers, said they saw everything, knew everything. Night before he vanished, he said he was done, wanted out. Next day, his boat's on the shore and he's gone. "The watchers," Miss Marple repeated, her tone thoughtful. "Who are they, Mr. Grimsby? Villagers? Outsiders? I don't know." Tom's voice cracked and he stood abruptly, his hands shaking. "I've said too much. Already. They're always watching, ma'am. Eyes in the mist on the lake in the village. You're stirring things up and it ain't safe. Leave it be, for your own sake." Miss Marple rose, unfazed by his agitation. "Thank you, Mr. Grimsby. You've been most helpful. One last thing. Did Jem ever mention anyone with the initial L? A partner, perhaps, or a contact?" Tom frowned, then shook his head. "No L, I recall. Jem worked alone, mostly. But Nathaniel Harrow, years back, he ran with the same crowd. Ask his widow, if you dare." As Tom hurried off, his net abandoned, Miss Marple stood by the dock, gazing at the lake. The smuggling operation explained Jem's nocturnal ventures, and perhaps his fate. But the watchers added a new layer of intrigue. Were they real? A group enforcing the lake's illicit trade? Or a fiction born of fear? The connection to Nathaniel Harrow was no surprise. Mrs. Harrow's locked diary likely held answers, and Miss Marple resolved to find a way to read it. The lake shimmered, its calm a stark contrast to the secrets Tom's confession had stirred. Miss Marple adjusted, her shawl, her resolve firm. The fisherman's words were a crack in the mystery's surface, and she would pry it open. Watchers or no? Chapter 7. Secrets in the Hull. The morning mist hung low over Lake Haven, shrouding the village in a ghostly veil, as Miss Marple made her way to the old shed behind the village hall. Tom Grimsby's confession about the smuggling operation and the mysterious watchers had sharpened her focus on Jem Corbin's stranded boat. If, as she suspected, the boat held more than the eye could see, examining it might yield the next piece of the puzzle. Armed with her notebook, the cloth with the initial L, and a small magnifying glass, she approached the shed with purposeful steps, her umbrella tapping the damp earth. Mr. Harrow, the innkeeper, had reluctantly provided the key to the shed after Miss Marple's gentle but persistent inquiries at breakfast. "Ain't much to see," he'd grumbled, his broad face creased with unease. "Just a boat, scratched up and useless, best left alone." But Miss Marple's polite smile had disarmed him, and now she stood before the shed's weathered door, its hinges creaking as she turned the key. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and old wood. The boat rested on sawhorses, its hull tilted slightly, as if reluctant to reveal its secrets. It was a simple rowboat, sturdy but unremarkable, its paint chipped and faded. The symbols described by the villagers, a circle with intersecting lines and a crooked star, were etched into the starboard side, their edges jagged, as though carved in haste. Miss Marple ran her fingers over them, noting their depth. Not decorative, she thought, but deliberate, perhaps a marker or a warning. She began a methodical inspection, her magnifying glass glinting in the dim light that filtered through a cracked window. The boat's interior was bare, stripped of oars and gear, but Miss Marple's keen eyes caught a faint seam along the bench seat, barely visible unless one knew to look. With a gentle press, the seat's edge shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Her pulse quickened, though her expression remained composed. "Well," she murmured, "what have we here?" Inside the compartment lay 2 items, a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased, and a small silver locket, its chain tangled. Miss Marple unfolded the paper first, revealing a series of numbers and letters scrawled in a hurried hand. 3N7W, midnight, L trusts no one. The note was cryptic, possibly a code for a rendezvous point or a smuggling drop. The mention of L sent a jolt through her. Could it connect to the cloth from the cove, or to someone like Lawrence Tate, Nathaniel Harrow's old friend? She tucked the note into her notebook, her mind already parsing its meaning. The locket was next. Its clasp was stiff but yielded under her careful touch, revealing a tiny portrait of a young woman with dark hair and a wistful smile. No inscription identified her, but the locket's presence in the boat suggested a personal connection to Jem, or someone else involved in the lake's secrets. Miss Marple turned it over, noting a faint scratch on the back, almost like a tiny initial. E. Eliza Harrow, or another player in this murky drama. As she examined the locket, a shadow flickered across the shed's window. Miss Marple's head snapped up, but the movement was gone, leaving only the rustle of leaves outside. The watchers, she thought, recalling Tom's fear. Someone was keeping tabs on her, and the boat's hidden treasures were likely the reason. She closed the compartment, ensuring it looked undisturbed, and pocketed the locket beside the fishhook and cloth. The shed felt smaller now, its walls pressing in with the weight of unseen eyes. Stepping outside, Miss Marple locked the door and paused, scanning the misty surroundings. The village was quiet, but the lake's presence loomed, its calm surface a lie. The coded note and locket pointed to betrayal. Someone trusted by L had turned, perhaps leading to Jem's disappearance. The symbols on the boat might mark it as part of the smuggling ring, a signal to the watchers or their enemies, and the locket's portrait hinted at a personal motive, a thread she would follow back to the village. As she returned to the inn, Miss Marple's thoughts churned. The boat's secrets were a breakthrough, but they raised new questions. Who was L? What did the code mean? And whose face gazed from the locket? She would need to revisit Mrs. Harrow's diary and press Tom for more about the smuggling. The lake's guardians, whether watchers or villagers, were closing ranks, but Miss Marple was undeterred. The hull had whispered its secrets, and she would listen until the truth surfaced. Chapter 8. The Village's Hidden Pact. The village hall was packed, its air thick with the scent of damp wool and nervous anticipation. Miss Marple sat near the back, her knitting needles clicking softly, a picture of calm amid the restless crowd. The meeting had been called by Mr. Harrow, the innkeeper, ostensibly to discuss repairs to the dock. But Miss Marple suspected a deeper purpose. Her discoveries in the stranded boat, the coded note reading 3N7W Midnight, L trusts no one, and the locket with its mysterious portrait, had stirred the village. And Tom Grimsby's confession about smuggling and the Watchers hinted at a conspiracy rooted in Lake Haven's heart. Tonight, she hoped, the villagers' words would betray their secrets. Mr. Harrow stood at the front, his broad frame commanding attention. "We've got business to settle," he began, his voice gruff. "The lake's been trouble lately. Storms, strange happenings. We need to keep things orderly, like always." His eyes swept the room, lingering on Miss Marple for a fraction too long. She met his gaze with a polite smile, her needles never pausing. The discussion started mundanely. Budgets, timber costs. But tension simmered beneath the surface. Miss Marple noted the villagers' furtive glances, the way hands fidgeted or voices sharpened. An elderly man, his face like crumpled parchment, rose to speak. "It's the lake," he said, his voice quavering. "Ever since that boat was found, it's stirred things up. We ought to leave it be, like we swore." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Miss Marple's ears pricked. "Swore?" She leaned forward slightly, her knitting a mask for her keen interest. Before she could ponder further, a younger woman, Martha Tate, whose late father, Lawrence, had been Nathaniel Harrow's friend, stood, her face flushed. "I'll leave it be. That's what you always say, Mr. Grayson. The lake took my father, took Jem, and we're still pretending it's just bad luck?" Mr. Harrow's face darkened. "Martha, mind your tongue. We've kept this village safe for decades. Don't go digging up old promises." "Promises?" Martha snapped, her voice rising. "You mean the pact? The one you and the elders made to keep quiet about what happens on that lake? My father died because of it, and I'll not hold my peace." The room erupted in shouts, some villagers defending the elders, others siding with Martha. Miss Marple's needles stilled as she absorbed the revelation. A pact, decades old, to protect the lake's secrets, likely tied to the smuggling Tom had described, or something darker. The coded note's mention of L flashed in her mind. Lawrence Tate? Or another L among the elders? She raised a hand, her voice cutting through the din with surprising authority. "If I may," she said, standing. The room quieted, all eyes on the unassuming woman in tweed. "This pact you speak of, it sounds important. Might someone explain it to an outsider? For clarity's sake." Mr. Harrow hesitated, his jaw tight, but Mr. Grayson, the elderly man, spoke, his voice weary. "It was a long time ago, Miss Marple. The lake's always been different. Things happened, accidents, disappearances. The elders, my father among 'em, agreed to keep it quiet, to protect the village. We swore to watch the lake, to keep outsiders from poking around. It's kept us safe." "Safe?" Martha interjected, her eyes blazing. "Safe for who? Not my father, not Nathaniel Harrow, not Jem. Someone's using that pact to hide their own sins." A heavy silence fell. Miss Marple noted Mr. Harrow's clenched fists, Martha's trembling anger, and the uneasy glances among the elders. The pact, she deduced, was a shield for the smuggling operation, or perhaps a cover for murder. The Watchers, Tom feared, might be enforcers of this agreement, ensuring silence at any cost. As the meeting dissolved into muttered arguments, Miss Marple slipped out, her mind racing. The pact explained the villagers' reluctance to speak, their fear of the lake's curse. But Martha's outburst suggested fractures. Old grudges, betrayals. The locket's portrait and the note's cryptic warning pointed to someone central to the pact. Someone L, no longer trusted. Was it Lawrence Tate, betrayed by his peers? Or Mrs. Harrow, whose locked diary might name the guilty? Outside, the mist curled around the village, and the lake loomed in the distance, its secrets guarded by a pact now cracking under scrutiny. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her resolve unwavering. The village had hidden its truth for too long, and she would unravel it, one thread at a time. Chapter 9. The Drowned Man's Clue. The dawn broke over Lake Haven with a reluctant light, the mist parting just enough to reveal the lake's glassy expanse. Miss Marple was at the inn's breakfast table, her notebook open beside a cooling cup of tea, when Clara burst in, her face pale. "Jane, you must come quickly. They've found a body by the lake, washed up near the north shore." Miss Marple set her pen down, her calm demeanour unshaken though her mind raced. A body was a grim turn, but it might hold answers to the questions piling up. The stranded boat's symbols, the coded note, 3N7W, midnight, L trusts no one. The locket, with its mysterious portrait, and the village's secretive pact. She gathered her handbag, containing the cloth with the initial L, the rusted fishhook and the locket, and followed Clara to the shore, her umbrella a steady companion. A small crowd had gathered near the rocks where Jem Corbin's boat had been found. The villagers stood in a hushed semicircle, their faces a mix of fear and resignation. Mr. Harrow, his broad frame looming over the scene, was directing two men to cover the body with a tarp. Miss Marple approached, her sharp eyes taking in the details. The man's sodden clothes, his hands clenched as if in defiance, and a faint glint of something clutched in his fingers. "Mr. Harrow," she said, her voice polite but firm, "might I have a look before you move him?" It could be important. Mr. Harrow hesitated, his eyes narrowing, but the weight of the villager's stares prompted a grudging nod. "Be quick, Miss Marple. It's not a pleasant sight." She knelt beside the body, her movements careful to avoid the muddy shore. The man was middle-aged, his face weathered, with a scar above one eyebrow that suggested a life of rough work. His clothes were those of a fisherman, though the boots were oddly fine, as if recently purchased. In his right hand, rigor mortis had locked his fingers around a crumpled piece of paper, a map fragment, its edges torn and waterlogged. Miss Marple gently pried it free, noting the villagers' uneasy murmurs. The fragment showed a partial outline of Lake Despair, with a single mark at what appeared to be the coordinates 3N7W, the same as the coded note from the boat. A faint sketch of a cove, like the one where she'd found the cloth, was visible, along with a scrawled word. "Locket." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The locket with its portrait of a young woman and the scratched initial E was now undeniably linked to this man's fate. Had he been searching for it, or for the woman it depicted? She straightened, slipping the map fragment into her notebook. "Do you know him?" she asked Mr. Harrow, her tone conversational but probing. He shook his head, though his eyes avoided hers. "Stranger, far as I can tell. Could be a drifter, washed up from the other side of the lake." Martha Tate, standing nearby, scoffed. "A stranger with a map of our lake? Don't play coy, Mr. Harrow. He's tied to the smuggling, same as Jem, same as my father." Her voice carried the bitterness of the village meeting, where the pact had surfaced. Miss Marple's mind turned, connecting the dots. The man had likely been part of the smuggling ring Tom Grimsby described, perhaps seeking the locket or its owner. The map's reference to 3N7W and the cove suggested a specific purpose. A rendezvous, a hidden cache, or a confrontation gone wrong. The locket's E could point to Eliza Harrow, whose locked diary remained a tantalizing mystery, or to another E yet unknown. The Watchers, she suspected, had ensured this man's silence, just as they had Jem's. As the villagers dispersed, Miss Marple lingered studying the shore. The body's arrival so soon after her discoveries in the boat was no coincidence. Someone was rattled, and the lake was yielding its secrets reluctantly. She thought of the village pact, a shield for the guilty, and Martha's accusation of hidden sins. The drowned man's clue was a thread, linking the locket, the boat, and the cove, and she would follow it to its source. Back at the inn, Miss Marple spread the map fragment beside the coded note. Their matching coordinates a silent confirmation. The lake's surface might be calm, but beneath it churned a current of betrayal and death. She would need to press Martha about her father's role in the smuggling, and revisit Mrs. Harrow, whose grief might mask more than she admitted. The drowned man had died clutching a clue, and Miss Marple would not let it slip through her fingers. Chapter 10. The Lake's False Calm. The afternoon sky over Lake Haven was deceptively clear, the mist retreating to reveal Lake Despair's mirror-like surface. Miss Marple, her handbag bulging with clues, the cloth with the initial L, the rusted fishhook, the locket, the coded note, 3N7W midnight, L trusts no one, and the drowned man's map fragment, felt the weight of the mystery pressing closer. The village pact, the smuggling ring, and the Watchers formed a tangled web, and the drowned man's connection to the locket suggested a personal betrayal at its heart. Determined to test her theory about the coordinates 3N7W, she accepted an invitation from Martha Tate to join a small group on a boat to explore the lake's central waters. Martha, still fiery from the village meeting, had insisted on the outing, claiming the lake held answers her father's death had never received. Mr. Harrow, reluctantly, provided a sturdy rowboat, and Tom Grimsby, his face taut with unease, agreed to row. Clara, ever loyal, joined them, her presence a comfort to Miss Marple. As they pushed off from the dock, the lake's calm felt like a held breath, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, noting the cove's position relative to the coordinates. The boat glided smoothly, Tom's oars cutting the water with practiced ease. Martha sat at the bow, her gaze fixed on the lake's centre. "My father used to talk about a spot out here," she said, her voice low. "Said it was where the lake kept its secrets. I think it's near those coordinates you found, Miss Marple." Miss Marple nodded, her mind aligning the map fragment with the coded note. "The cove is at 3N7W, or near it. If your father knew of a specific place, it might explain why the drowned man carried that map." Clara shivered, clutching her shawl. "It's too quiet today. The lake's never this still." Tom grunted, his eyes darting to the shore. "Lake's got its moods. Best not to trust it." They were nearly at the lake's centre when the sky darkened abruptly, clouds rolling in with unnatural speed. A gust of wind rocked the boat, and Miss Marple gripped the side, her umbrella nearly slipping into the water. "A storm," she said, her voice steady despite the rising waves. "Rather sudden, don't you think?" Martha's face paled. "It's not natural. We need to turn back." But as Tom pulled on the oars, a sharp crack echoed from beneath the boat. Water began to seep through a jagged hole in the hull. The wood splintered as if struck from below. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Sabotage," she said, her tone clipped. "Someone tampered with this boat." Panic erupted. Clara clutched Miss Marple's arm, while Martha scrambled to plug the hole with her scarf. Tom cursed, rowing frantically, but the boat was taking on water fast. The shore was too far, and the storm's ferocity turned the lake into a churning beast. Miss Marple, her mind racing, scanned the boat for anything to slow the leak. She spotted a small tin bucket under the seat and thrust it at Clara. "Bail! Quickly!" As Clara scooped water, Miss Marple examined the hole. The damage was deliberate, the wood weakened by precise cuts, likely made before they set out. Someone had known they were heading to the coordinates. Someone who wanted the lake's secrets to remain submerged. The Watchers, she thought, or an ally within the village pact. The boat lurched, waves threatening to capsize it, but Tom's strength held them steady. "There's an islet ahead," he shouted, pointing to a rocky outcrop barely visible through the storm. With desperate effort, they reached it, the boat grinding against the rocks as they scrambled ashore. The vessel sank behind them, its hull swallowed by the lake. Soaked and shaken, the group huddled on the islet, the storm raging around them. Miss Marple, her hat sodden but her resolve intact, surveyed her companions. Tom's fear was palpable, Martha's anger simmered, and Clara's eyes were wide with shock. "Someone meant for us to drown," Miss Marple said, her voice cutting through the wind. "Who knew we were taking this boat?" Martha's jaw tightened. "Mr. Harrow gave us the boat, and half the village saw us leave." Tom shook his head, his voice hoarse. "It's the Watchers. They know everything. I told you, ma'am, it's not safe." Miss Marple's mind churned. The sabotage was a warning or an attempt to silence her investigation. The coordinates 3N7W were key, linked to the cove, the locket, and now the drowned man. Someone feared what she might find there. As the storm began to ease, she resolved to return to the cove and confront Mrs. Harrow about the diary. The lake's false calm had shattered, and the truth was rising, whether the Watchers liked it or not. Chapter 11. The Watcher Unmasked. The morning after the harrowing escape from the sabotaged boat, Lake Haven was subdued, the village cloaked in a fog that seemed to mirror its secrets. Miss Marple, her tweed coat still damp from the storm, sat at the inn's parlour table, her handbag open before her. The clues she had gathered, the cloth with the initial L, the rusted fishhook, the locket with its portrait and scratched E, the coded note 3N7W Midnight L trusts no one, and the drowned man's map fragment formed a constellation of evidence. But the sabotage had made one thing clear. Someone was desperate to stop her. The shadowy figure she had glimpsed in the cove, the one Tom Grimsby called a Watcher, was her next target. Determined to confront this elusive presence, Miss Marple devised a plan. She announced to Clara, within earshot of the inn's staff, that she intended to revisit the cove at dusk to search for more clues. It was a calculated risk, designed to draw the Watcher out. Clara, her face etched with worry, insisted on accompanying her, but Miss Marple gently declined. "I need you to keep an eye on Mr. Harrow and Martha," she said. "Their reactions may tell us more than they intend." As dusk settled, the lake's mist thickened, curling around the reeds like ghostly fingers. Miss Marple approached the cove, her umbrella a silent ally, her senses alert. The coordinates 3N7W marked this spot as central to the mystery, linked to the locket, the map, and the smuggling operation. She moved deliberately, pausing to examine the reeds where she had found the cloth, her footsteps soft on the muddy shore. The air was heavy, the lake's silence broken only by the occasional ripple. A rustle in the willows confirmed her suspicions. She turned, her voice steady despite the darkness. "You've been watching me since I arrived," she called. "It's time we spoke. I mean you no harm, but I will have answers." The shadows shifted, and a figure emerged, cloaked in a dark coat, their face obscured by a scarf. They hesitated, then lowered the scarf, revealing Martha Tate's angular features, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted, though she hid her surprise. "Miss Tate," she said, her tone calm, "I suspected someone close to the village, but not you. Why watch me? And what do you know of the lake's tragedies?" Martha's hands trembled, but her voice was fierce. "I had to be sure you weren't one of them, the ones who've bled this village dry. I've been watching the cove since Jem vanished, trying to catch the watchers, the real ones. They're not just stories, Miss Marple. They're real, and they killed my father, Jem, and that man who washed up." Miss Marple stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "Your father, Lawrence Tate, was he part of the smuggling ring? The note I found mentioned an L who trusted no one. Was that him?" Martha nodded, her eyes glistening. "He was. He and Nathaniel Harrow ran goods across the lake, small things at first, but it grew, bigger hauls, dangerous ones. Father wanted out like Jem did. He wrote that note, hid it in the boat, hoping someone would find it. The locket, it was his, a gift to my mother Eleanor. That's the E you saw. He kept it after she died, said it was his luck, but it didn't save him." Miss Marple's mind raced, the pieces clicking into place. Lawrence Tate, the L of the note, had been betrayed. His locket left in the boat as a marker or a taunt. The portrait of Eleanor explained the E, ruling out Eliza Harrow for now. "And the Watchers?" she pressed. "Who are they?" Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know their names, but they're tied to the pact. Someone in the village, someone high up, controls them. They use the lake, the cove, to move things. Father said there was a mastermind, someone who'd kill to keep the pact secret. I think it's why the boat was sabotaged. They know you're close." Miss Marple's lips pursed. The sabotage, the drowned man, the symbols, all pointed to a leader orchestrating the lake's dark trade. Martha's role as a watcher was self-appointed, driven by grief, but her knowledge was invaluable. "You've been brave, Martha," she said, "but you must trust me now. Do you know anything about Mrs. Harrow's diary?" Martha shook her head. "Only that Nathaniel wrote in it too. Father said it held truths about the lake, things that could ruin the guilty. Eliza keeps it locked because she's afraid." As they parted, the fog closed in, and Miss Marple felt the weight of Martha's revelations. The Watcher was unmasked, but the mastermind remained hidden, pulling strings from the shadows. The diary was now her priority. It might name the leader of the pact. The lake's tragedies were converging, and Miss Marple knew the next move would be her most dangerous yet. Chapter 12. The diary's final page, the flickering light of a single candle, illuminated the inn's parlour, where Miss Marple sat with Mrs. Harrow's leather-bound diary on the table before her. The diary, with its brass lock now carefully pried open, had been a challenge, but Miss Marple's resourcefulness, aided by a hairpin and a discreet visit to the village blacksmith, had prevailed. Martha Tate's revelations about her father, Lawrence Tate, and the locket's connection to her mother Eleanor had convinced Miss Marple that the diary held the key to the lake's secrets. The cloth with the initial L, the coded note, 3N7W midnight, L trusts no one, the drowned man's map fragment, and the sabotaged boat all pointed to a truth buried in its pages, one tied to the smuggling ring and the village pact. Miss Marple opened the diary, her fingers tracing the worn cover. The entries, written in Nathaniel Harrow's precise hand, began with mundane notes about fishing and village life. But as she turned the pages, the tone shifted to something darker. She read carefully, her sharp mind decoding the cryptic phrases that emerged. One entry, dated 8 years prior, caught her eye. L suspects the cove is compromised. E's memory haunts me. The pact binds us, but at what cost? Her pulse quickened. L was Lawrence Tate, as Martha had confirmed, and E referred to Eleanor, his late wife. The mention of the cove aligned with the coordinates near 3N7W, where Miss Marple had found the cloth and where the drowned man's map pointed. But the reference to Eleanor's memory suggested a personal motive, something beyond smuggling. She flipped forward, finding a later entry. The ring grows reckless. Grayson demands more, but I fear betrayal. If I fall, let this be my confession. The lake hides her truth. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Grayson likely referred to old Mr. Grayson, the elder who had spoken of the pact at the village meeting. His role in the smuggling ring was now clear, but the phrase her truth intrigued her. Was it Eleanor, or another woman tied to the lake's tragedies? The locket's portrait of Eleanor, left in Jem Corbin's boat, suggested a connection to the stranded vessel, perhaps a deliberate clue left by Lawrence or Nathaniel. The final pages were the most revealing. Nathaniel's handwriting grew unsteady, as if written in haste. I saw her face again, in the mist. Elle was right. No one can be trusted. The cove, midnight, our last chance. If I don't return, it's because of love, not greed. A crude sketch followed, mirroring the symbols on Jem's boat. A circle with intersecting lines and a crooked star. Below it, in tiny script, was a single line. For E, forgive me. Miss Marple leaned back, the pieces falling into place. The diary revealed a crime of passion woven into the smuggling ring's greed. Nathaniel and Lawrence had been partners, bound by the village pact to protect the lake's illicit trade. But Eleanor's death, likely years before, had sparked a rift. The locket, a keepsake of Eleanor, had been Nathaniel's, not Lawrence's, a token of his unspoken love for his friend's wife. When Lawrence grew suspicious of the smuggling ring's leaders, particularly Grayson, Nathaniel had tried to protect him, hiding the coded note in the boat. But betrayal, perhaps by Grayson or another, had led to both men's deaths. Their boats stranded as warnings. Jem Corbin, years later, had stumbled onto the same truth. His boat marked with the same symbols. his fate sealed by the watchers. The cloth with the initial L was likely Lawrence's, dropped in the cove during a fateful meeting. The drowned man, Miss Marple deduced, had been a smuggler seeking the locket or the cove's secrets, killed to keep the pact intact. The sabotage of her boat was a desperate act by the mastermind, likely Grayson or someone he served to silence her before she exposed the truth. Miss Marple closed the diary, her resolve firm. The final page had named the players and their motives: greed for the smuggling ring, love for Nathaniel's downfall, and fear for the village's silence. Grayson's role demanded confrontation, and the cove at 3N7W might hold physical evidence. A cache, a weapon, or another clue. She would need Martha's courage and Clara's loyalty to face the lake's guardians, but the diary's truths had armed her with knowledge no watcher could deny. As the candle flickered out, the lake loomed. Beyond the inn's window, its calmer lie. Miss Marple knew the final confrontation was near, and the diary's secrets would light the way to justice. Chapter 13. Hope Rises from the Depths. The moon hung low over Lake Despair, its light fractured by the mist that clung to the cove at 3N7W. Miss Marple stood at the water's edge, her tweed coat dusted with dew, her handbag heavy with the weight of truth. The cloth with the initial L, the rusted fishhook, the locket with Eleanor's portrait, the coded note, 3N7W midnight, L trusts no one, the drowned man's map fragment, and the diary's damning entries. The pieces had formed a picture of betrayal, love, and murder, with the village pact and its smuggling ring at the heart. Tonight she would confront the mastermind, Mr. Grayson, the elder whose greed had drowned more than hope, and end the lake's reign of terror. Miss Marple had orchestrated the gathering carefully, enlisting Martha Tate's fiery resolve and Clara Wentworth's quiet strength. She had sent word to the village, claiming to have found proof in the cove, knowing it would draw Grayson and his watchers. Martha stood beside her, clutching a lantern, while Clara waited nearby with Tom Grimsby, whose fear had turned to reluctant courage. The villagers, summoned by whispers of a reckoning, gathered on the shore, their faces tense with anticipation. The cove was silent, its reeds swaying as if guarding the lake's secrets. Miss Marple's voice cut through the mist, calm but commanding. "Mr. Grayson, I know you're here. The diary has spoken, and the lake's lies are over. Show yourself, and let us end this." A figure emerged from the shadows, his stooped frame unmistakable. Mr. Grayson's eyes glinted with defiance, though his hands trembled. "You've meddled too far, Miss Marple," he rasped. "The pact kept this village alive. You've no right to tear it apart." Miss Marple stepped forward, her umbrella a steady anchor. "The pact was a shield for your greed, Mr. Grayson. You led the smuggling ring, profiting from liquor, coin, and worse. When Lawrence Tate and Nathaniel Harrow sought to expose you, you ensured their boats were stranded, their lives taken. Jem Corbin met the same fate, and the drowned man, your own courier, died when he grew curious about the locket." The villagers gasped, their murmurs rising. Martha's voice rang out, sharp with grief. "You killed my father! The note, the locket, they were his warnings." Grayson's face twisted. Lawrence was a fool, like Nathaniel. They loved the same woman, Eleanor, and it blinded them. I gave them a chance to stay silent, but they chose the lake. The watchers were my eyes, my hands. The cove was our vault, and I protected it." Miss Marple held up the diary. Its pages opened to Nathaniel's final confession. Nathaniel wrote of Eleanor's truth. A crime of passion, yes, but your greed turned it to murder. The locket, left in Jem's boat, was your taunt, a reminder of their failure. The symbols marked your territory, a signal to your watchers, and when I grew close, you sabotaged the boat, hoping to drown the truth. Grayson laughed, a hollow sound. "You've no proof, old woman. The lake keeps its own." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "The lake betrays you, Mr. Grayson. The cove holds your cash, barrels of smuggled goods hidden beneath the rocks. And damn, Grimsby found them this morning, guided by the map fragment. The villagers will see it for themselves." Tom stepped forward, his voice steady. "It's true. Barrels, coins, marked with those symbols. Enough to damn you." The crowd surged, their fear turning to anger. Grayson's defiance crumbled as Mr. Harrow, his face grim, seized his arm. "You've blood on your hands, Grayson. The pact's broken." As the villagers led Grayson away, Miss Marple turned to the lake, its surface rippling under the moon. The diary had named the guilty. The cove had yielded its secrets, and the locket had tied love to loss. Martha, tears in her eyes, thanked her, while Clara clasped her hand. Lake Haven would heal. Its wounds aired at last, but Miss Marple sensed the lake's depth still whispered. Of other pacts, other truths, she adjusted her hat, her work here done. "Hope rises," she murmured, "but the lake never forgets." As she walked back to the inn, the mist closed in, and Lake Despair held its silence, a mystery only half told.